I think it's going. Hopefully I don't trip. Okay. So, welcome to Kittrell Family Stuff. This is Jason Kittrell and Kel and Oliver Kittrell. And we're just going to read some books together that are okay. They're no longer copyrighted protected. And just spend some time together, and you can spend some time with us. We don't know how this will go. We'll just figure it out as we go. The first book we're going to go together through is called The Call of the Wild by Jack London. Jack London. As you see, my version of this book is really old. I've had this book since I was in third grade. My daddy got me a bunch of books in third grade and gave them to me for my Christmas present. Okay, let's jump in. The Call of the Wild. Oh man, let's see if this is chapter 1. Here's the introduction. Never before was there such a dog, exclaimed John Thornton and his partners, watching the beautiful dog perform near miracles of courage and strength, agreed. When he was made, the mold was broke. Do you know what that means?
No.
When you make something, still to this day, when you make something with a mold, like if you made an old brass key, you used a hard fire mold and you poured liquid metal into it, and that created an object you were trying to make. So they're saying when the dog was made, the mold was broken. Never another dog like him. Next paragraph. Buck was a dog of the Southland. It seemed impossible that he could survive the cold and brutality of life in the wild, cruel north. But his spirit was never broken. He learned to obey the whip without being cowed by it, and he learned to kill to stay alive. He learned the 1,001 things it would take to make him one of the greatest dogs the North had ever seen. Only one man, John Thornton, ever won Buck's heart. But even this great love was tempered by another, larger force. It was a strange feeling, mysterious, even frightening. And when it drew him, his love for John Thornton could not stop Buck from answering the call of the wild. Okay. Chapter 1 is called Into the Primitive. Into the Primitive. That was a good picture right there, man. Oh, looks falling apart. Into the Primitive. Here's a song. I don't know how the tune goes, but it says, Old longings, nomadic leap, chafing at custom's chain. Again from its brumal sleep wakens the ferine strain. Buck did not read the newspapers, or he would have known that trouble was brewing, not alone for himself, but for every tidewater dog, strong of muscle and with warm, long hair, from Puget Sound to San Diego, because men, groping in the Arctic darkness, had found a yellow metal, and because steamship and transportation companies were booming to find, thousands of men were rushing into the Northland. These men wanted dogs, and the dogs they wanted were heavy dogs, with strong muscles by which to toil, and furry coats to protect them from the frost. Buck lived at a big house in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley. Judge Miller's place, it was called. It stood back from the road, half hidden among the trees, through which glimpses could be caught of a wide, cool veranda that ran around its four sides. It's like a big porch. The house was approached by gravel driveways which wound about through wide, spreading lawns and under interlacing boughs of tall poplars. You know what all those mean, right? At the rear, things were on an even a more spacious scale than the front. There were great stables where a dozen grooms and boys held forth rows of vine-clad servants' cottages, an endless and orderly array of outhouses, long grape arbors, green pastures, orchards, and berry patches. Then there was the pumping plant for the artesian well, and the big cement tank where Judge Miller's boys took their morning plunge and kept cool in the hot afternoon. They just had a big pool. They could pump the water in and just have a pool whenever they wanted to. Over this great kingdom, Buck ruled. Here he was born, and here he had lived the 4 years of his life. It was true there were other dogs. They could not but be other dogs on so vast a place, but they did not count. They came and went, resided in the populous kennels, or lived obscurely in the recesses of the house after the fashion of Toots, the Japanese pug, or Isabel, the Mexican hairless. Strange creatures that rarely put nose out of the door or set foot to the ground. On the other hand, there were the fox terriers, a score of them at least, who yelped fearful promises at Toots and Isabel, looking out of the windows at them, protected by a legion of housemaids, armed with brooms and mops. So there's little dogs inside, and terriers that stay outside, probably for fox hunting, and they always yelped at the little ones, but the maids would hit them with brooms. But Buck was neither house dog nor kennel dog. The whole realm was he. He plunged into the swimming tank or went hunting with the judge's sons. He escorted Molly and Alice, the judge's daughters, on long twilight or early morning rambles. On wintry nights, he lay at the judge's feet before the roaring library fire. He carried the judge's grandsons on his back, or rolled them in the grass, and guarded their footsteps through wild adventures down to the fountain in the stable yard, and beyond, where the paddocks were and the berry patches. Among the terriers he stalked imperiously, and Toots and Isabel he utterly ignored, for he was king over all creeping, crawling, flying things of Judge Miller's place, humans included. His father, Elmo, a huge St. Bernard, had been the judge's inseparable companion, and Buck bid fair to follow in the way of his father. He was not so large. He weighed only 140 pounds, for his mother, Shep, had been a Scotch shepherd dog. Nevertheless, 140 pounds, to which was added the dignity that comes with good living and universal respect, enabled him to carry himself in a right royal fashion. Just don't let Merlin play with the cord there. So, for reference, Tully is about 74 pounds, 75 pounds. So, this dog Buck was at least twice that weight. It says during the 4 years since his puppyhood, he had lived the life of a sated aristocrat. He had a fine pride in himself, was ever a trifle egotistical, and as country gentlemen sometimes become because of their insular situation. But he had saved himself by not becoming a mere pampered house dog. Hunting and kindred outdoor delights had kept down the fat and hardened his muscles. And to him, as to the cold tubbing races, the love of water had been a tonic and a health preserver. So he liked to go hunting, he liked to play outside, he liked to get in the water. And this was the manner of Dog Buck was in the fall of 1897, when the Klondike strike dragged men from all over the world into the frozen north. But Buck did not read any newspapers, and he did not know that Manuel, one of the gardener's helpers, was an undesirable acquaintance. Manuel had one besetting sin. He loved to play Chinese lottery. Also in his gambling, he had one besetting weakness: faith in a system. And this made his end certain. For to play a system requires money, while the wages of a gardener's helper do not lap over the needs of a wife and numerous progeny. So he didn't have a wife or kids. The judge was at a meeting of the Raising Growers Association, and the boys were busy organizing an athletic club on the memorial night of Manuel's treachery. So Manuel, the servant guy, has been going into debt playing Chinese lottery. He's gambled all his money away, and he is, well, I guess he does have a wife and kids. He does have a wife and kids, and he's out of money. No one saw him and Buck go through the orchard on what Buck imagined was merely a stroll. And with the exception of a solitary man, no one saw them arrive at a little flag station on his college park. This man talked with Manuel, and money clinked between them. You might wrap up the goods before you deliver them, the stranger said gruffly. Manuel doubled a piece of stout rope around Buck's neck under the collar. Twist it, and you'll choke 'em plenty, said Manuel. The stranger grunted a ready affirmative. Buck had accepted the rope with quiet dignity. To be sure, it was an unwonted performance, but he had learned to trust in men he knew, and to give them credit for a wisdom that outreached his own. But when the ends of the rope were placed in the stranger's hand, he growled menacingly. He had merely intimated his displeasure and his pride, believing that to intimate was to command. But to his surprise, the rope tightened around his neck, shutting off his breath. In quick rage, he sprang at the man, who met him halfway, grappled him close by the throat, and with a deft twist threw him over on his back. Then the rope tightened mercilessly, while Buck struggled in a fury, his tongue lolled out the side of his mouth, his great chest panting futilely. Never in all his life had he been so vilely treated, and never in all his life had he been so angry. But his strength ebbed, his eyes glazed, and he knew nothing when the train was flagging and the two men threw him into the baggage car. The next he knew, he was dimly aware that his tongue was hurting, that he was being jolted along in some kind of conveyance. Conveyance just means it's something that moves you around. The hoarse shriek of a locomotive whistling in a crossing told him where he was. He had traveled too often with the judge not to know the sensation of riding in a baggage car. He opened his eyes, and into them came the unbridled anger of a kidnapped king. The man strained for his throat, but Buck was too quick for him. His jaws closed on the hand, nor did they relax until his senses were choked out of him once more. Yep, he has fits, the man said, hiding his mangled hand from the baggage man, who had been attracted by the sound of a struggle. I'm taking him up for the boss to Frisco. There's a crack dog doctor up there who thinks he can cure him. So he was lying, he said, but Buck gets angry. Concerning that night's ride, the man spoke most eloquently for himself in a little shed back of a saloon on the San Francisco waterfront. All I get is $50 for it, he grumbled, and I wouldn't do it for over $1,000 cold cash. His hand was wrapped in a bloody handkerchief, and the right trouser leg was ripped from the knee to ankle. How much did the other mug get? The saloon keeper demanded. 100 was his reply. Wouldn't take a sou less, so help me. That makes 150, the saloon keeper calculated, and he's worth it, or I'm square-headed. The kidnapper undid the bloody wrappings and looked nervously at his lacerated hand. If I don't get the hydrophobia, you know what hydrophobia is? That is rabies. Worried about getting rabies. If I don't get the hydrophobia, the guy said, it'll be because you were born to hang, laughed the saloon keeper. Here, lend me a hand before you pull your freight, he added. Dazed and suffering intolerable pain from throat and tongue, with the life half throttled out of him, Buck attempted to face his tormentors. But he was thrown down and choked repeatedly until they succeeded in filing the heavy brass collar off of his neck. Then the rope was removed, and he was flung into a cage-like crate. There he lay for the remainder of the weary night, nursing his wrath and wounded pride. He could not understand what it all meant. What did they want with him, these strange men? Why were they keeping him pent up in a narrow crate? He did not know why, but he felt oppressed by the vague sense of impending calamity. Several times during the night he sprung to his feet when the shed door rattled open, expecting to see the judge, or at least the boys. But each time it was the bulging face of the saloon keeper that peered in at him by the sickly light of a tallow candle. And each time the joyful bark that trembled in Buck's throat was twisted into a savage growl. I don't know how long this chapter is. Oh yeah, I got a little farther to go. But the saloon keeper let him alone. and in the morning 4 men entered and picked up the crate. More tormentors, Buck decided, for they were evil-looking creatures, ragged and unkempt. And he stormed and raged at them through the bars. They only laughed and poked sticks at him, which he promptly assailed with his teeth, until he realized that that was what they really wanted. Whereupon he lay down sullenly and allowed the crate to be lifted into a wagon. Then he and the crate in which he was imprisoned began a passage through many hands. Clerks in the express office took charge of him. He was carted about in another wagon. A truck carried him with an assortment of boxes and parcels upon a ferry steamer. He was trucked off the steamer into a great railway depot, and finally he was deposited into an express car. For 2 days and nights, this express car was dragged along the tail of shrieking locomotives, and for 2 days and nights Buck neither ate nor drank. In his anger, he had met the first advances of the express messengers with growls, and they had retaliated by teasing him. Here's those 4 guys putting sticks at him. When he flung himself against the bars, quivering and frothing, they laughed at him and taunted him. They growled and barked like detestable dogs, mewed, and flapped their arms and crowed. It was all very silly, he knew, but therefore the more outrage to his dignity, and his anger waxed and waxed. You know what that meant? His anger grew and grew. He did not mind the hunger so much, but the lack of water caused him severe suffering and fanned his wrath to a fever pitch. For that matter, high-strung and finely sensitive, the ill treatment had flung him into a fever, which was fed by inflammation of his parched and swollen throat and tongue. So, he's getting sick. He was glad for one thing: the rope was off his neck. That had given them an unfair advantage. But now that it was off, he would show them. They would never get another rope around his neck. Upon that he was resolved. For 2 days and nights he neither ate nor drank, and during those 2 days and nights of torment he accumulated a fund of wrath that boded ill for whoever first fell foul of him. His eyes turned bloodshot. He was metamorphosed into a raging fiend. So changed was he that the judge himself would not have recognized him, and the express messengers breathed with relief when they bundled him off the train at Seattle. 4 men gingerly carried the crate from the wagon into the small hide-walled backyard. A stout man with a red sweater that sagged generously at the neck came out and signed the book for the driver. That was the man, Buck divined, the next tormentor, for he hurled himself savagely at the bars. The man smiled grimly and brought a hatchet and a club. "You ain't going to take him out now?" the driver asked. "Sure," the man replied, driving the hatchet into the crate for a pry. There was an instantaneous scattering of the 4 men who had carried it in, and from safe perches on top of the wall they prepared to watch the performance. Buck rushed at the splintering wood, sinking his teeth into it, surging and wrestling with it. Wherever the hatchet fell on the outside, he was there on the inside, snarling and growling, as furiously anxious to get out as the man with the red sweater was calmly intent on getting him out. "Now, you red-eyed devil," he said, when he had made an opening sufficient for the passage of Buck's body. At the same time, he dropped the hatchet and shifted the club to his right hand. A wooden stick, club. And Buck was truly a red-eyed devil. As he drew himself together for the spring, hair bristling, mouth foaming, a mad glitter in his bloodshot eyes. Straight at the man he launched his 140 pounds of fury, surcharged with the pent passion of 2 days and nights. In midair, just as his jaws were about to close on the man, he received a shock that checked his body and brought his teeth together with an agonizing clip. He whirled over, fetching the ground on his back and side. He had never been struck by a club in his life, and he did not understand. With a snarl that was part bark and more scream, he was again on his feet and launched into the air, and again the shock came as he was brought crushingly to the ground. This time he was aware it was the club, but his madness knew no caution. A dozen times he charged, and as often the club broke the charge and smashed him down. After a particularly fierce blow, he crawled to his feet, too dazed to rest. He staggered limply about. the blood flowing from his nose and mouth and ears, his beautiful coat sprayed and flecked with bloody slaver. And the man advanced and deliberately dealt him a frightful blow on the nose. All the pain he had endured was as nothing compared to the exquisite agony of this. With a roar that was almost lion-like in its ferocity, he again hurled himself at the man, but the man, shifting the club from right to left, coolly caught him under the jaw, at the same time wrenching downward and backward. Buck described a complete circle in the air and half of another, and then crashed to the ground on his head and chest. For the last time he rushed, the man struck the shrewd blow he had purposely withheld for so long, and Buck crumpled up and went down, knocked utterly senseless. "He's no slouch at dog breaking, that's what I say," one of the men on the wall cried enthusiastically. Druther break, oh man, druther break cayuses any day, and twice on Sundays, was the reply of the driver as he climbed on the wagon and started the horses. Buck's senses came back to him, but not his strength. He lay where he had fallen, from where he watched the man in the red sweater. "Answers to the name of Buck," the man soliloquized, quoting from the saloon keeper's letter, which had announced the consignment of the crate and contents. "Well, Buck, my boy," he went on in a genial voice, "we've had our little ruction. The best thing we can do is to let it go at that. You've learned your place, and I know mine. Be a good dog, and all will go well, and the goose hanging high. Be a bad dog, and I'll weld the stuffing out of you. Understand?" As he spoke, he fearlessly patted the head he had so mercilessly pounded. And though Buck's hair involuntarily bristled at the touch of the hand, he endured it without protest. Then the man brought him water, and he drank eagerly, and later bolted a generous meal of raw meat, chunk by chunk, from the man's hand. He was beaten, and he knew that, but he was not broken. He saw once for all that he stood no chance against a man with a club. He had learned a lesson, and in all his afterlife he never forgot it. That club was a revelation. It was his introduction to the reign of primitive law, and he met the introduction halfway. The facts of life took on a fiercer aspect, and while he faced the aspect uncowed, he faced it with all the latent cunning in his nature aroused. As the days went by, other dogs came, in crates and at the ends of ropes, some docilely, some raging and roaring as he had come, and, one and all, he watched them pass under the dominion of the man in the red sweater, again and again. As he looked at each brutal performance, a lesson was driven home to Buck. A man with a club was a lawgiver, a master to be obeyed, though not necessarily conciliated. Of this last Buck was never guilty, though he did see beaten dogs that fawned upon the man and wagged their tails and licked his hand. He also saw one dog that would neither conciliate nor obey, finally killed in the struggle for mastery. Now and again the men came, strangers who talked excitedly, wheedlingly, and in all kinds of fashions to the man in the red sweater. And at such times that money passed between the strangers took one or more of the dogs away with them. Buck wondered where they went, for they never came back. The fear of the future was strong upon him, and he was glad each time that he was not selected. Yet his time came in the end, in the form of a little weazened man who spoke broken English, and many strange and uncouth explanations Buck could not understand. "Sacredam!" he cried, with his eyes lit upon Buck. "That is one big bully dog, eh? How much?" 300, and a present at that," was the prompt reply of the man in the red sweater. "And seeing that it's government money, you ain't got no kick coming, eh, Perrault?" Perrault grinned. Considering that the price of dogs had been boomed skyward by the unwonted demand, it was not an unfair sum for such a fine an animal. The Canadian government would be no loser, nor would its dispatches travel the slower. Perrault knew dogs, and when he looked at Buck, he knew that he was 1 in 1,000. 1 in 10,000, he commented mentally. Buck saw money pass between them, and he was not surprised when Curly, the good-natured Newfoundland, and he were led away by the little weazened man. That was the last he saw of the man of the red sweater, and as Curly and he looked at the receding Seattle from the deck of the narwhal. It was the last he saw of the warm Southland. Curly and he were taken below by Perrault and turned over to a black-faced giant man called Francois. Perrault was a French Canadian and swarthy, but Francois was a French Canadian half-breed and twice as swarthy. Swarthy means like muscly. They were a new kind of men to Buck, of which he was destined to meet many more. And while he developed no affection for them, he nonetheless grew honestly to respect them. He speedily learned that Perrault and Francois were fair men, calm and impartial in administering justice. We're almost done. We've got 3 more pages. Calm and impartial in administering justice, and too wise in the way of dogs to be fooled by dogs. In the 'tween decks of the narwhal, Buck and Curly joined the other dogs. One of them was a big snow-white fellow from Spitzbergen who had been brought away by a whaling captain and who later accompanied Geological Survey to the Barrens. He was friendly in a treacherous sort of way, smiling into one's face while he meditated some underhand trick, as, for instance, when he stole from Buck's food at the first meal. As Buck sprang to punish him, the lash of Francois' whip sang through the air, reaching the culprit first, and nothing remained to Buck but to recover the bone. That was fair, Francois, he decided, and the half-breed began his rise in Buck's estimation. The other dog made no advances, nor received any also. He did not attempt to steal from newcomers. He was a gloomy, morose fellow, and he showed Curly plainly that all he desired was to be left alone, and further, that there would be trouble if he were not left alone. Dave, he was called, and he ate and slept, or yawned between times, and took interest in nothing, not even when the narwhal crossed the Queen Charlotte Sound and rolled and pitched and bucked like the thing possessed. When Buck and Curly grew excited, half wild with fear, he raised his head as though annoyed, favored them with an incurious glance, yawned, and went to sleep again. Day and night the ship throbbed to the tireless pulse of the propeller, and though one day was very like another, it was apparent to Buck that the weather was steadily growing colder. At last, one morning, the propeller was quiet, and the narwhal was pervaded with an atmosphere of excitement. He felt it, as did the other dogs, and knew a change was at hand. Francois leashed them and brought them on deck. At the first step upon the cold surface, Buck's feet sank into a white, mushy something very like mud. He sprang back with a snort. More of this white stuff was falling through the air. He shook himself, but more of it fell upon him. He sniffed it curiously, and then licked some up on his tongue. It bit like fire, and the next instant was gone. This puzzled him. He tried it again with the same result. The onlookers laughed uproariously, and he felt ashamed. He knew not why, for it was his first snow. That's the end of chapter 1. That's pretty short. That's pretty tough to hear how that man was beating up the dog, huh? I did not remember that part at all. That is how the mean guys used to do that kind of stuff. That stuff is illegal now. Obviously, you can't be beating up dogs with a club or you will go to jail. There's laws against that stuff now. But of course, there might have been laws against it then. I don't know. But any questions? Nope. All right. We'll read another chapter another night. Go hit stop on it, Ollie.